Hi, and welcome to On and Off, our podcast covering the on premise and off premise beverage alcohol industry.
And I'm Kyle Swartz, editor of Beverage Dynamics magazine. Today we're talking with James Jackson, Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships and Growth Initiatives at the Association of Retail and Consumer Professionals. The association recently gave an interesting presentation at another one of our company's trade conferences, one for Power Sports. Our company owns a lot of magazines. And we wanted to talk about how category management strategies can also apply to beverage alcohol retail. So let's jump right in. First of all, James, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, category management. First, why don't you just tell us a little bit about what category management is?
Yeah, so the easiest way to describe it, if you don't know anything about it, is to put yourself in the role of a shopper. So, if I'm going into a grocery store, I'm seeing a lot of things. So, the brands that are on the shelf, the items that are on the shelf, pricing, how it's being priced. I might have come in using ad circular, or I had a digital ad come over on my phone, as well as how it's all laid out in the store. That's all category management.
Sure, absolutely. And as you said, that kind of starts with insights and leaning into
Yeah.
insights. How can beverage alcohol retailers better understand shopper behavior beyond sales data?
Yeah, and that's a good question because I will tell you there's a lot of data out there beyond sales data or POS. So some retailers have loyalty card data. So they're able to understand, yes, I made a sale, but there's some behavioral aspects to it as well. There's a lot of companies out there that provide information about the shopper themselves, including different segments, so I can understand what Gen Z is doing versus baby boomers. Um, you get information about the economy that has impacts. There's just a lot of information. We really, as part of our process, want to put the shopper at the center. So we have put insights immersion as the first step in our category management process.
One of the pieces of advice
Yeah,
is to get inside the customer's head.
yeah.
So, how does that translate to the beverage alcohol industry?
Yeah, so I will tell you in just seeing what's happening in the marketplace as a whole, our shoppers are definitely changing and they're impacting how things are taking place, in a store, whether that's online or in the store. So getting into the mind of the shopper is really understanding what they're thinking, what they're trying to accomplish. So you'll see a lot of customers that come into the store, they actually are on a mission. So they're trying to accomplish something. They have a job to do. So I'm shopping for a party. And so I'm in party mode. So my trip is really geared towards that versus I'm here to stock up for home for my family for the next couple of weeks. So understanding why the shopper is there, who they're shopping for, what they're shopping for, all of those things really matter and can really influence kind of who I'm targeting and how I'm approaching them from a category management perspective.
Sure. And speaking of shoppers being on a mission, can you talk a little bit about consumer decision trees and how they might affect alcohol? For example, shoppers choosing between, let's say, wine, spirits, beer, or RTDs, ready to drink beverages.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I kind of started on the example. Um, let's say, for instance, a shopper is coming in, they're also the consumer in the example I'll give, but they're focused on, I just want to kind of lay back and relax, right? So I want to have a good wine to go with my dinner and just kick back. So their idea is maybe I want to do something that's a little easy. I don't want to spend a lot of money. It's during the week, so I don't want to make a lot of decisions. So I'm going to treat that differently than if I'm hosting a party and it's at my house and I'm trying to impress people, but I also want to have something that maybe is familiar. The last thing you want to have is something at a party that nobody knows, unless it's a party geared towards that. So
Or nobody wants.
or nobody wants, exactly. And so that shopper is making those decisions. I will also add that Before, a lot of that decision making was happening at the shelf. They came in with an idea, but then they were kind of scanning the shelf and figure things out. Now you've got, people coming in and they already had the decision made because they've done the research. They're actually checking things on their phones. And so that decision tree is being impacted by other inputs that maybe weren't there before. Even AI is coming into play.
So, how should alcohol retailers be thinking about the assortment depth
Yeah.
versus simplicity?
Yeah. So it's a great question. Because I think that some retailers in general will think the more assortment I have, the better. But if you walk into a store, it can blind you because there's too much. So sometimes, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, less is better, right? Or sometimes you come into a store and I'm on a treasure hunt. And so I want to go through and try things or see different things. So it really depends on maybe the type of retailer you are. Why are you drawing people into the store? So this is, I'm going to get very technical here, but in category management, certain categories have certain roles. So if my role is to drive traffic into my store, I might have a broader assortment, right? Because I'm trying to grab people's attention versus, yeah, it's an occasion, and there's another role, it's an occasional. I don't have to have a wide assortment. I just need to have the right brands and the right items for specific reasons. So if there's a mixture that happens depending on who you are, what you're trying to accomplish. But in general, if you have too many items on the shelf, especially those items that nobody cares about, you're just creating confusion. And that shopper will get overwhelmed and potentially they might not buy.
Yeah, we had a retailer in Baltimore, Socialize, who's one of the better retailers in the country. Socialize is a great beverage alcohol retailer, half retailer, half nightclub. But
Oh,
what you
okay.
it's a really interesting concept. But of course, when they opened
Yeah.
the nightclub, they reduced the size of the retail store, and the owner actually said it was to his benefit to reduce the number of SKUs he was carrying, and
Yes.
I that stuck with me a lot when G, the owner, told me that
Yeah.
last year. And speaking of reducing items, obviously, as you reduce, you kind of want to focus more on anchor brands and sort of how
Yeah.
shoppers will flow towards them. Can you talk about how that might look? I mean, a beverage alcohol store with something like wine or craft beer.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this because I was actually going to approach it in a couple different ways. So traditionally, and this is with any category, so I won't specifically talk about alcohol in this conversation. If you go into a store, a lot of times the anchor brands are brands that you know, right? Because you want it to be familiar to draw people into the aisle. And then it kind of depends, but you might go with a familiar brand, premium brand, imports, and so on. Some specialty retailers, because they want to be known for having variety and something different, they may put something like an innovative item or something that's really hot that's at the end of the to draw people's attention like wow, this is something I haven't seen before, let me go in more and see what else I can find. But traditionally, if you go in the snack aisle, you probably have Frito-Lay at the end, right? Just because people know that you have you have Tide at the end of the detergent aisle because people they're not only looking for what can I find, there it's cues for which aisle is it,
Mm.
right? And so that helps people understand, okay, they have what I want, and then maybe, and so what you might even see is you'll have anchor brands on both ends of the aisle, right?
Hmm.
So Coke and Pepsi, you'll see Coke on one end and Pepsi on the other end because you want them to go through the entire aisle if they're shopping. And so that's one of the ways that we use to merchandise and have people flow and walk through the entire process.
So, we just mentioned Socialized, the place that has the liquor store and the bar.
Yeah.
Um, do these principles also apply to the on-premise, like behind
Oh,
the bar?
100%.
Tell
100%.
us about it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And just a little history. I back in a couple of years ago, I worked with Cisco Food Service. So I understand the food service side and the on-premise side very much so. But yeah, and you have fewer options potentially when you're coming into the on-premise piece of things. So I've always seen where all of a sudden somebody walks in on premise and they ask for, do you have this IPA? And the disappointment when they don't, right? So when we get back to that shopper lens or that consumer lens, it's like, okay, who is my target consumer or my visitor that's coming in? What do they like? I got to make sure I have those items. I could try a couple other things, but I just don't have the space or the variety options to really miss. And you'll see that, especially some of your smaller specialty retailers, same thing. I I have to make sure I have the right items on the shelf because if I don't, they won't come back.
How can you identify those gaps?
A lot of it comes from data. So when you go back to the insights immersion piece, that's a key component. There's a lot of data out there. There's companies like a Nielsen or EPG even has some
Sure.
example of data, right? Where you know what are the big items, the fastest moving items. You don't want to play around with those. You want to make sure you have them. Not only that, but you want to make sure you have enough holding power on the shelf so that when people come in, you're not out of stock. So it's one thing to have it, on or like have a tag on the shelf. It's another thing to have it available when they shop. And so some of those faster moving items, you have to make sure instead of having two facings of everything or two rows of everything, you might have to have six of the most popular item and two of maybe more niche items.
So, category management emphasizes um, merchandising the way customers shop.
Yeah.
So, how could this reshape how the liquor stores group their products, such as like by occasion or region or price tier?
Yeah. So what we're seeing, even more so now than ever, is that people are shopping by occasion. Okay. So it can be challenging, but you do have the opportunity to merchandise in that way. So an example, and I know there were some notes on this. If I see that I'm always pairing two items together, I might want to have them close to each other, right? So I might be doing some cross merchandising. Um, and I'm making it, I probably can't give you a great example, but if I have wine and cups or things like, how do I put them closer together so that shopper, it's an ease of shop? Again, that shopper comes in, a lot of them are time starved. You do have those people I mentioned, the treasure hunt, where they're there to really, I just want to find stuff. Most people are not that way. Most people only have a certain amount of time. They only have a certain amount of attention span. So if you can make it easier by pairing things together or making them closer together, you'll get multiple sales. You'll get a better experience, and that shopper will say, hey, they're thinking about me. So you might have a section for parties, for celebrations versus a section for, I'm making it up, but a section for kickback and relax. It could be something like that. But that insights immersion will tell you what are the key occasions for the audience that you're serving. So that always starts back with that.
Yeah, and that kind of goes right into our next question here, the idea of adjacent opportunities, such as
Yeah.
pairing spirits with mixers, wine,
Yes.
food themes, or seasonal displays. You want to expand a little bit on that?
Yeah. So and I'll talk about seasonal for a minute. You know, the retailers probably know exactly what their fastest moving items are during a given season. You want to make those prominent. You might have an extra display out there for those items because shoppers are coming in for that occasion. So I did write a couple down, but Oktoberfest in the fall, right? That might be something where there are certain items that tend to increase during that time period versus the rest of the year. So, when it's other holidays. you want to make sure you have those as well. So um, being in tune to what that shopper is trying to accomplish, especially in a given time period of the year, that's where you'll get the incremental sale. And then, like you said, pairing mixers with spirits and things like that, again, that just makes it easy for them to say yes and make a decision and not have to hunt all over the store. They they might not be thinking about it when they come in. They might have, I want that spirit, and they're not thinking about the mixer or vice versa. You're giving them that trigger for an impulse. It might also help with your margin, right? So maybe mixers, they're higher margin. So maybe by doing that and pairing it together, you're not only getting the incremental sale, but you're also getting a higher profit ring when that shopper comes through.
Yeah, like Cinco de Mayo coming up
Yeah.
is a huge holiday. So
Yes.
I guess most people are probably going to be making margaritas. So
Margaritas.
yeah, your
So
tequila, your mixer, your salt.
all the components, how do you make it easier for them? So maybe you have a display with all the components all pulled together versus having them navigate the store. You might have signage all over the store, but now I have to go all over the store. If you know they're coming in for Cinco de Mayo, why not make it easier for them to get it and be done with it? Because you know they might be in the store for 5, 10 minutes max.
Right. So the presentation also references the high-low pricing and everyday value.
Mhm.
Um, so which pricing approach tends to work best with beverage alcohol?
That's a tough question. It's probably a hybrid, right? But it also does depend on what kind of retailer you are. If you're known to be high low, that's just who you are. If you change, it takes a while for shoppers to understand that I'm not going to come in on the deal. We've trained shoppers, especially a lot of retailers who do promote a lot. They've trained the shopper that the only time I'm going to come in is when it's on promotion. So if all of a sudden you don't promote it, you will not make up that that volume right away. So you have to slowly merge into more of an everyday. But I think there are some items where, and this again gets into the data, there are some items where you don't need to promote it all the time or even at all. Those items, people are going to buy it no matter what. You're literally just giving away money by doing that. They're just okay with, I need a price that I can count on all the time. And again, it depends on the shopper, but usually what happens high low, that high low, putting that promotion out there, that's to drive traffic. And so if there's a item that is well known and people come in to the store for that item, you might have that item on promotion to drive the traffic in. And then you have other items that are not on promotion or that tie in, or like we talked about the Cinco de Mayos. So all of a sudden, you're throwing out the alcohol, but you're not going to promote everything else. That's where you make your margin.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what I'm going to be doing on Cinco de Mayo? You talked about drinking margaritas. I'm going to be celebrating my grandmother's 100th birthday. She turns 100 years old on Cinco de Mayo. God bless her.
Nice.
Wow. I
That's
Charlotte.
mean,
wow, 100?
100 years old. She still lives by herself in a house too in Natick, Massachusetts. It's wild.
Whoa, that is.
Yeah,
So
she
what are
she
you
is.
doing for her
We're getting
birthday?
the whole family together. She doesn't listen to my podcast, so I can say this, but we're getting the town to do a proclamation for her as well. It's going to be a wonderful celebration of 100 years. 100 years is crazy.
That's
and
awesome.
God
you
bless her.
could serve
She's
margaritas too.
Yeah,
I was,
exactly.
we
There
want her
you
to
go.
live to 101. We're not trying to put her down on Cinco de Mayo, you know. Anyways, you were talking about multiples and multiple items in the presentation that you gave at the Power Sports conference. Mentioned multiples to increase basket size. How can alcohol retailers encourage customers to buy, more than one item per visit? And you were already kind of hinting on this, but if you want to
I
expand on
hit
that
on it.
further.
But I will tell you, there's certain items that make sense to do multiples. Especially like, you know, canned cocktails, for instance, is a
Hmm.
a huge trend. As you think about the carbonated beverage world, They do that all day long. So that
Yeah.
you can take cues from other categories
Mm.
and kind of maybe replicate what they're doing. But there are certain, another one would be, hey, multiple so people can try different flavors, right? I'm I'm buying something for, um, my frat. I'm making it up, but I'm buying something for my frat, and everybody has different flavor profiles. So do a multiple, and I might buy 3 packs, one of each flavor. So there, again, and I probably keep talking about it, but the shopper insight will tell you
Mm.
kind of also what are good matches so that you balance it out. Um, and so those are some ways. So multiples is a good one. Buy one, get ones are good. And so they're, cross merch. So buy this, get that, to build the basket. So, the Cinco de Mayo is another good example. You know, buy this item and get these other ones for 10% off, or you already have them discounted, but it just incents people to say, well, that makes sense. Why wouldn't I add that to my basket? And that's really what you're trying to do is you don't want to get them out of the market. So the other thing I will mention in some of these categories, if they get to my house, I'm going to drink it. So there's expandable consumption. So it's not like if I get to my house, I'm out of the market for the next month. I'm just going to drink more of it. So and maybe not drink something else. So there might be some concern that I'm hurting myself by getting them out of the market for a while. But when it comes to beverage, a lot of times that's expandable consumption. So I am going to drink it and I'm going to come back the next week and fill up again. And so that's another way to think about
So this is another tough one, but
it.
category management emphasizes a retailer and manufacturer collaboration, but beverage alcohol has the three-tier system with the
Yeah.
wholesale layer in the middle. So how can the retailers work more closely with, all the other tiers to grow the categories?
That is a hard one, I know. From what I understand, I've been out of that side of the business for a while. I mean, the retailer, I will tell you, part of it is challenging, whether it's distributor, in some instance, manufacturer, to provide those insights, right? As well as challenging when they tell you to do something, right? If they're saying, bring in this item, challenge it. Why? Who is it for? Is this the right shopper? How should I merchandise it? How should I price it? Because it should benefit the distributor, right? If the distributor is putting in an item and it doesn't sell, it hurts everybody and it takes away space for an item that does sell. So I think that there has to be some pushback, because I know, it's easy for a distributor to say take everything and just, but that's why category management comes in. So the better that retailer understands who they're servicing, who their guest or customer is, and what they need, they've got to be able to share that back upstream, right? Give me more of this and less of that.
Mm.
If you're going to sell this to me, I have to have it at a certain price point. If it doesn't hit the price point threshold, then it doesn't fit within my overall game plan. Telling them I am really going to be known for these certain categories. What other item? So we talked about the assortment piece. Are there other items that you have that fit within what I'm trying to accomplish with my strategy? Are there other imports? Are there things that are coming in? I want to be first to market. So I think that's where you can feed back information to instruct them on what you're looking for versus just being the receiver of everything and trying to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, our wholesaler friend just turned the podcast off, but you make an extremely
I
good
know.
point.
But I mean, whether you're in alcohol, whether you're in food, whether you're in auto aftermarket, I mean, the shopper is king, right? The
Mm.
shopper tells you what you need to know. And we have to take cues from that. But if I'm a retailer and I do not share it back, because if the wholesaler doesn't know what I'm trying to accomplish, they're not going to give me what I need. Right. So there has to be a two-way street. And so if the retailer has to know their business, and they have to have a strategy, and then they have to be upfront, it again will hopefully help that wholesaler because they're having more throughput. More cases are going through the warehouse.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it benefits everybody.
We have a panel at our conference. You guys are speaking at our conference this year, I believe. But we have a panel, the wholesaler panel, the 3-tier panel, where it's basically just retailers standing up and screaming this at wholesalers for about 45 minutes straight. So we certainly understand what you're saying. Would love to see it happen ourselves. And speaking of that presentation you're going to give, I know it talks about, you say, 3 growth levers: more shoppers, buying more, and buying more often. Which of those do you think is the biggest opportunity for beverage alcohol retailers?
That's a tough one. As normally, given what's happening in the industry, where there is that shopper dynamic that fewer shoppers are consuming alcohol, I think you have to focus on, buying more and more often. How do I, and that's where understanding what they want, especially if I'm a retailer and I'm competing against other retailers and I'm competing, you got alcohol and mass and all these different. So if I'm going to get more often, I've got to really be dialed into what they want. And then we talked about the buy one, get ones and the multiples and things like that. How do I make it easy for them to shop? I have what they want, and I have it at the right time, right place, all that, and then incent them to buy more with what we talked about. Because maybe someday things will go back and there'll be more growth. Maybe there's some innovation that comes into play. But right now, given where we are, we've got to figure out, once we've got them, that we make sure we deliver on the promise that we've extended out in our marketing.
Keep them coming back.
Keep them coming back. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, James, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. James, where can people go to find some of your content, some of the information? Share a link or somewhere that people can go for this.
Yeah, so the easiest place to go is www.Catman.global. That is everything around the Category Management Association. So I talked a lot about that here. It also has Shopper Insights as well. So that's our sister organization kind of rolled into one. Also, if you go down to the bottom, you can subscribe to our newsletter. And we will be actually focusing, we're going to do some category deep dives, and there is one that will be focused on alcoholic beverages. So that'll be a key component. We have a lot of members that are in this space. So our audience is your audience. And so,
I was going to say, listeners, make sure you subscribe to that newsletter. I'm sure that's going to be an extremely usple bit of information. Catman sounds like a B superhero. Like something from the 70s, like
Catman.
Catman. But yes, I would definitely have watched that movie. I love B superhero movies. And thanks to everyone out there who listened to yet another episode of On and Off. Join us next time, and we'll talk about another fascinating topic that spans the retail and restaurant worlds. Until then, cheers.
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 If you enjoyed the On and Off podcast, please hit the subscribe button. Also, you can find more great content at cheersonline.com and beveragedynamics.com, including recipes, product reviews, and interviews with the movers and shakers of the beverage alcohol industry. You can also sign up for our free weekly e-newsletters for both publications on our websites. Cheers!